All right, we're live.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you today. I am Dr. Clayton Copeland, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Kim Thompson. We are both of the School of Information Science, and we are here to talk with you today about a passion of ours, inclusive learning and teaching, how-tos of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, in the university classroom. We know that in today's society, we have very diverse representation in our classrooms, whether those are physical or virtual. We have a milieu of diversities, and we want to ensure that our environments are accessible and usable by all of our students for their most effective learning. The legal definition of accessible is that a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective and equally integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. The person with a disability must be able to obtain information as fully, equally, and independently as a person without a disability. We know that we have the power to deconstruct disability by creating accessible environments. Areas of accessibility exploration within this discussion include the accessibility of our course content, synchronous and asynchronous communication, assignment and assessment design, and learning technologies. We'll also leave you with some tools to integrate some of these features of accessibility that are in today's discussion. Moving from accessibility to universal design, we should know that universal design originated in the field of architecture. Very simply defined, universal design means making small changes that benefit everyone. In our physical environment, some common examples of universal design might include curb cuts, which are useful not only for those using mobility devices such as wheelchairs, walkers, or canes, but also to caregivers with strollers, or in our discipline, librarians with book carts, for example. Level entrances to facilities are also important. Levered handles to replace traditional doorknobs that are harder to grasp. Those can be helpful to everyone. Also, automatic or push button access for exterior and also interior points of entrance and egress. Universal design ensures that any culture, age, size, weight, race, gender, or ability can experience an environment that promotes their health, safety, and welfare. Speaking of the impact of universal design, there are many impacts. Economically, universal design is cost efficient over time. Environmentally, it's resource efficient. And socially, universal design ensures safety and security.
Thank you. So with disability, we also want to talk about not only visible disability, which might be someone who is using a white-tipped cane, or someone in a wheelchair, or somebody who asks for an audio accommodation, but there's also invisible, latent, and hidden disability that a student may or may not disclose. This could include low hearing, or low visibility, or low mobility, or a learning disability, or somewhere on the autism spectrum. There are many, many ways that people can have a disability that makes the learning process a little more of a challenge, but they may not choose to disclose it. And so by being sure our classes are accessible as possible to anyone, we're benefiting these students who may not disclose this, and so not becoming a barrier or a disadvantage to them as learners in our classrooms. So next slide, please. So the applying concepts of universal design for learning, we want to just give a couple of examples of some practical ways to do this. So if we have students, learners with visual limitations, one thing that you can do is in Microsoft Word, there's style formatting. So using headings and subheadings in the structure to be sure that a screen reader can jump from item to item and read the content on the page. There's also alternative text for images, and this is just a right click on the image and then opening up an alt text interface on the side where you type in what the image is, so that when the screen reader sees that image, instead of just skipping it, it reads what the image is, so somebody who cannot see the image can still get the information that you're trying to communicate with that image. Another activity you can do is to upload both PDF and doc versions of any lectures or any resources that you have whenever possible. The reason for this is because some screen readers, a long time ago, they read PDFs better than doc versions. Now, mostly they read doc versions better than PDF. So you're just not sure which one is going to be more readable. If you want to be sure you're maintaining the formatting of the page, maybe the way it's arranged, then you can upload a PDF, but also upload a doc version so someone who can still get the content out of that. In terms of font choices, we have sans serif, which means it doesn't have the little lines at the top and the bottom of each letter. Arial, Calibrl are examples of sans serif fonts, and a 12-point minimum for written documents that will possibly print out. For slides, you want even larger. You want as readable as possible on the page or on the slide. Next slide, please. With your choice of font, you want to be sure the font that you're choosing is very dark, or black is always a good option, rather than color coding your content. Because if you have red and green to show different things, someone who's colorblind or has low visibility may not see those differences, and the screen readers may not be reading that. And so just having plain black font wherever possible. If you do need to highlight, underlining or bold and underline are good ways to do that. Also be aware of spacing and layout on the screen or page, or the slide panes, whatever the space is, to make sure it's not too crowded, that you have space between items as well. And if you're using Microsoft Office, you can check accessibility. There's a check accessibility feature, and we'll talk a bit more about that tool a little bit later.
And so applying concepts of UDL for learners with hearing limitations includes recording video lectures for reviewing. That way the participants can also have the information reiterated, which is very helpful for all learners. Providing copies of slides and notes can also be very useful, such that someone can follow along with the outline of the content as someone is speaking verbally. If in a virtual environment, providing closed captioning whenever possible is very important. If closed captioning is not available, transcription afterward would be another option, as well as providing a detailed handout to the learner to follow along. Trying to have a video of your face when lecturing with good resolution is also very important, particularly if closed captioning is not available. Speak slowly and with a clear tone. Shouting should be avoided. In fact, some tones can be much more difficult to hear than others. So speaking slowly and with a clear, level tone is very important.
Thank you. And so then with mobility limitations that you might have in the classroom, but this also affects online students. And it may not be apparent. It may not be apparent in the face-to-face classroom that someone has low mobility or not a lot of control of their hands or fingers, but in an online environment, it may be even more of a problem. So realize that students may have slower typing speeds. They may need a larger monitor or adaptive keyboards or a rollerball. If mobility is an issue with their fingers and wrists and arms, text to speech is also something that your students may be using, and sticky keys to navigate the website or their document. Next slide, please.
And just to add there too, Kim, if I may,
Please.
Also speech to text for those with mobility challenges, such that they can speak what will be typed in their assignments and so forth.
Thank you. Thank you. And so when you do have a class, I know sometimes we have a choice whether we record a Blackboard session or an online session or not. The idea is that you want to make things as accessible and as useful as possible. And so recording your online meetings can help. Even if the student was there in the session, sometimes having the option to review it again later can be very useful. Also, providing transcripts of that or some kind of detailed notes. Sometimes in Blackboard Collaborate, it does not automatically close caption, and so one suggestion that we've been given is to designate a note taker in your online meetings in Collaborate, and then afterwards have those notes presented to the class so everyone can benefit from those. Also reinforcing verbal communications with written communications. When maybe you've said it in the online meeting, but then being sure that you reiterate that in an announcement or somehow to your students so it's very clear and they can see it in many different ways to better be able to capture what is needed in case they couldn't take notes quickly during the live session.
And now moving to students with neurodiversities, being explicit about how to ask for clarification. Also, a general practice of using plain language. So avoiding forms of language such as hyperbole that could be, the intended meaning could be misunderstood. Set up a questions about assignments discussion board. This also in an online class can help build community among the students, allowing them to ask and answer questions not only of the instructor, but also of one another. We know that students have learning variations, and it may very well be that a colleague in the class can explain a concept in a way that is clearer to someone or an alternative to the way the information was presented in class. Also, just in terms of materials and what we're providing to students, making sure that we provide clear structuring and subheadings throughout the lecture materials such that students can follow along with the major concepts that are being presented.
Clayton, just on the second bullet point there about the questions about assignments, I see that being really useful, again, for all learners, because sometimes it can be quite confusing. They have your class, they have my class, they have somebody else's class. Everyone puts their information in different places. Everyone organizes their threads. Some are very organized, some are willy-nilly. And so having questions about assignments, everyone knows that that's where they can go to ask questions and find answers about assignments, which is probably the largest stressful item in any course is how am I going to do, how can I do this assignment well?
Absolutely. Thank you for adding that, Kim. Also being very clear about expectations for behavior in class and on discussion boards, as well as with other means of communication. And in terms of assessments and assignments, scaffolding those and having some low stakes assignments or assignments broken into smaller component pieces such that students are consistently receiving both formative and summative feedback. And finally, we have some tools and resources for you to help integrate some of these principles of universal design. And so I'll turn it over to Kim to discuss some of those.
Thanks. So just to start, there are many ways to transcribe and to caption your videos. For my classes, I like to use the YouTube automatic captioning, which is listed there. So I do the video, I try to keep them short because a 1 hour video, it's very difficult to sit through a 1 hour video anyway, especially of a lecture. And so I try to keep my videos short, and then I upload them to YouTube and I use their automatic transcribing or captioning, and then I just fix it in there. And I've had many students say that they really appreciate having the captioning just because maybe the hearing's a little bit low. Someone who's a second language learner of English, it's very much appreciated. And just if you didn't quite understand that term that they used or what they used, seeing it can really help. Also, creating a script of what you're talking about and maybe giving the students the script at the same time that you are presenting it. Clayton, could you talk a bit about the Dragon dictation?
Yes, absolutely. And so Dragon Dictation app is something that we all use on a daily basis with our cell phones, etc. And it is a feature that actually will allow us to speak and have what we have said typed. And so that can be very useful. The Dragon Naturally Speaking resource is also a speech-to-text assistive technology. It is very inexpensive, but it may be something that you choose to have open as a secondary application during course meetings. I know earlier Kim mentioned the limitations of Blackboard Collaborate in creating a transcript. Having Dragon open as a secondary application would allow for a transcript to be generated and then just some fine-tuning and editing before providing the transcript to the students could be very useful.
Thank you. Also, Google Slides has a closed captioning feature. When you do present, you can set it up to closed caption, and that does it. Teams has an automatic closed captioning, so quite a few do. Just kind of poke around and see if you can turn that on when you're giving a lecture live.
Absolutely, and Google Docs also has a dictation feature. Some other technologies that you might be considering for recording in the virtual environment would include Screencast-O-Matic, and there is a free version available. Camtasia Studio is something that we frequently use in our department. It's $165 for the education version. Vimeo is another option, as is YouTube. And just as every instructor and learner are going to be different and have different learning styles, all of these technologies are slightly different, though based on the same principles. So finding the one that works best for you is important. That's why we've provided several options. In terms of accessibility checkers, Microsoft now does offer built-in accessibility checkers where it will go through a document, identify accessibility barriers in terms of a document or presentation being readable for a screen reader, an assistive technology. And so we have listed here different versions of the accessibility checkers and Microsoft products, and where to find the accessibility checkers within each of those versions. So it is slightly different. One word of caution with the accessibility checkers is that it does not catch every single error in a document or presentation. So while they can be a very useful tool as a starting point for checking for accessibility, it's also important to not become over-reliant and say, oh, well, it passed the accessibility checker, good to go. So we have here just some more detail about where to access the accessibility checkers. And then also a PDF accessibility checker if you're also uploading a PDF of your documents. Also, to point you to some tools and resources that could be very useful for students, both Microsoft and Apple Mac have built-in assistive technologies, including things like screen magnifiers and screen readers, or sticky keys, which slows down the speed at which something is typed, so that if someone has a strike against a key in error, sticky keys makes it less likely for erroneous text to be typed. So you can check in based on your operating system or provide these to students for them to use these as some accessibility features. One of the accessibility features that is newer is allowing students to block certain apps from their computers during certain time frames so that they can focus. So that can also be very useful. In terms of document and presentation accessibility, again, the built-in accessibility features are so useful, but our very own University of South Carolina Center for Teaching Excellence has provided detailed accessibility guides and tutorials for creating and editing your own documents and presentations. So we do just also want to refer you there. Also here we have some videos that we've linked if you're interested in looking at web accessibility. In particular, this offers some resources about the lived experiences of some of our students and users of assistive technologies and why web accessibility is important. And so universal design for learning and inclusive teaching and learning, keep in mind that accessibility strategies intended for some learners will also be helpful to others. Accessibility helps ensure meaningful interactions and stronger learning outcomes for all of our students. And we have some references for you as well. Both Dr. Thompson and I are available at any point to help provide further resources or to address questions about our presentation today. We thank you kindly for your time, for your attention, and for your desire to make important differences in your classroom and to create classrooms that are accessible to all.
Thank you.